The junior officers whispered, "Short timer," when Colonel Hayes entered the war room. She could see it in their eyes. They thought she was mentally checked out, coasting toward retirement. Then she opened the classified briefing folder that would test 3 decades of experience. What happened in the next 72 hours would rewrite everything the Pentagon thought they knew about experience, age, and what it really means to be at the peak of your career. Because sometimes your most legendary moment comes right before you're supposed to leave. The red phone rang at exactly 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday that would change military history forever. Colonel Patricia Hayes was signing routine paperwork when every alarm in the Pentagon's Delta Command Center screamed to life simultaneously. The sound made her coffee mug jump across the desk as 30 of America's brightest young strategists rushed into the war room. "Ma'am, we have a coordinated 3-front crisis," announced Captain Michael Torres, the Pentagon's golden boy strategist. His voice cracked with the kind of pressure that broke junior officers. Russia just threatened to cut gas supplies to Europe. China launched military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. Iran is signaling they'll close the Strait of Hormuz. Patricia watched as the room filled with 2 8- to 3 5-year-old military minds, MBA degrees, unlimited energy, and the confidence that comes from never facing the impossible. She could see them stealing glances at her retirement countdown calendar on the wall. 337 days remaining. Captain Torres spread satellite images across the conference table like tarot cards predicting doom. Each move appears coordinated. We're looking at a 3-pronged attack on global stability, and we don't have the resources to fight all 3 simultaneously. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, fresh from Harvard's Strategic Studies program, leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never watched a plan fall apart in real time. "We should engage diplomatic channels immediately. The UN Security Council could—" "No," interrupted Major David Park, another rising star who'd read every military strategy book ever written but had never actually been shot at. "Economic sanctions are more effective. We target their financial systems and—" "You're both thinking too small," Torres snapped, frustration already eating at his composure. "This requires military deterrence, but we can't project power on 3 fronts. It's mathematically impossible." Patricia remained silent in the corner, watching these brilliant young minds attack the problem like a pack of wolves fighting over the same bone. They had theories. She had scars. For the next 2 hours, Patricia listened to the smartest military minds of their generation, slowly realize they were drowning. Every solution created 2 new problems. Every strategy required resources they didn't have. Every option led to a dead end. Torres paced the room like a caged tiger, his confidence cracking under pressure. "Okay, let's run scenarios. If we commit naval forces to the Taiwan Strait, Russia moves into Ukraine while Europe freezes. If we secure energy supplies, China takes Taiwan while we're distracted. If we confront all 3, we lose," finished Lieutenant Kim, the reality hitting her like a punch to the gut. "We don't have enough ships, enough allies, enough anything." Major Park slammed his fist on the table. "There has to be something we're missing. Some angle we haven't considered." The room fell silent, except for the hum of computers processing scenarios that all ended in failure. 30 of America's best and brightest had spent 2 hours proving that the crisis was unsolvable. That's when Patricia Hayes smiled. Not the polite smile of a woman counting down to retirement. Not the patient expression of someone tolerating younger colleagues. This was the smile of a predator who just spotted weakness in her prey. "You're overthinking it," she said quietly, and the entire room turned toward her like sunflowers following the light. Torres's face flushed. "Ma'am, with respect, we've run every possible scenario. The mathematics are clear." "The mathematics are wrong," Patricia interrupted, standing up for the first time since the crisis began. "Because you're calculating this like it's 3 separate problems." Patricia walked to the main display screen with the measured pace of someone who'd done this dance before. The young officers watched with the mixture of skepticism and curiosity reserved for old-timers who claimed to have seen it all. "Bosnia, 1,994, she began, her fingers dancing across the digital map interface. 3 ethnic groups, coordinated attacks, international crisis. Sound familiar? Torres shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, that was a regional conflict. This is global. Scale doesn't change patterns, Captain. Patricia's voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of impossible situations. Kosovo, 1999. Iraq, 2003. Afghanistan, 2009. Syria, 2014. Every major crisis I've managed had the same DNA as this one. She highlighted 3 points on the world map. You see 3 separate problems because you learned strategy from textbooks. I learned it from watching smart plans fail and stupid ones succeed. Lieutenant Kim leaned forward despite herself. What are we missing? Patricia's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally asked the right question. You're missing the most important rule of complex warfare. Coordinated attacks always have coordinated weaknesses. She drew connecting lines between Russia, China, and Iran on the screen. They're not just working together. They're dependent on each other. Touch the right pressure point, and the whole thing collapses like dominoes. Major Park scoffed. Ma'am, even if that's true, we still don't have the resources to one. We don't need resources, Patricia said, her voice cutting through his objection like a blade. We need relationships. What happened next would become legendary in Pentagon circles for decades to come. Patricia pulled out her secure phone and dialed a number from memory. The room watched in stunned silence as she spoke in fluent Norwegian. Who was that? Torres whispered as she hung up. Norwegian Prime Minister. We served together in a NATO exercise 15 years ago. His country just agreed to emergency gas supplies to Europe. Before anyone could process that information, she was dialing again. This time, in Russian-accented English. Kazakhstan Energy Minister. His son studied at West Point. I recommended him personally. They're opening alternative oil routes to China within 6 hours. The young officers stared like they were watching magic. One more call, Patricia said, switching to Japanese. Lieutenant Kim found her voice. Ma'am, how do you… 2011 tsunami relief operation, Patricia replied without looking up from her phone. Worked with their LNG specialist for 3 months. Japan just agreed to emergency energy support for Taiwan. Torres's mouth hung open. But how is this possible? Patricia set down the phone and faced the room full of shocked faces. 30 years of crises teach you something textbooks can't. Wars are won by people, not weapons. And people fight for people they trust. She pointed to the 3 highlighted areas on the map. Russia's gas threat, neutralized by Norwegian reserves. China's energy pressure, broken by Kazakh alternatives. Iran's oil blockade, irrelevant with Japanese LNG support. Major Park stared at the screen in disbelief. You just solved it. In 3 phone calls. I didn't solve anything, Patricia corrected. I activated relationships built over 3 decades of showing up when it mattered. Within 6 hours, the coordinated attack began falling apart, exactly as Patricia had predicted. Russia discovered their gas threat was worthless when Norwegian supplies started flowing to Europe faster than Moscow could blink. China realized their Taiwan pressure was meaningless when Japan's LNG tankers made their energy blockade irrelevant. Iran watched their Hormuz strategy crumble as alternative routes bypassed their control entirely. The war room transformed from a crisis center into a celebration as reports flooded in from around the globe. Russian foreign minister is requesting emergency talks, announced a communications officer. Chinese naval exercises are withdrawing from Taiwan waters, called out another. Iran just reopened shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz, reported a third. Torres slumped in his chair, overwhelmed. 72 hours ago, we were looking at World War III. How did you know this would work? Patricia sat down for the first time since the crisis began. Because I've seen this movie before, Captain. Different actors, same script. The key isn't having all the answers, it's knowing which questions to ask and who to ask them to. Lieutenant Kim shook her head in amazement. All those years we thought experience was just knowledge. Experience isn't what you know, Patricia replied. It's who you know, who trusts you, and who will answer their phone at 3 a.m. when the world is falling apart. Major Park looked at her retirement calendar on the wall. Ma'am, are you really leaving in 337 days? Patricia followed his gaze to the countdown that had defined her final year of service, the calendar that every young officer had used to measure her relevance, the reminder that everyone thought her best days were behind her. The following Monday, Patricia found 2 envelopes on her desk. One contained her completed retirement paperwork, ready for final signature. The other bore the Pentagon's highest classification level. Torres knocked on her door. Ma'am, the Joint Chiefs are asking about your decision. Patricia held up both envelopes. Funny thing about retirement, Captain. Everyone assumes you're winding down, that your motivation is gone, that your best work is behind you. She walked to the window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard where new recruits were arriving for orientation. Fresh faces, unlimited energy, unshakable confidence in their own potential. I thought the same thing, she continued. For months I believed my career was ending, that 30 years of experience was just finished. Torres waited, understanding this moment would define not just Patricia's future, but how he viewed his own career trajectory. Patricia turned from the window and made her choice. She opened the retirement envelope, pulled out the papers, and fed them into her document shredder. Turns out I was wrong, she said, opening the classified envelope. I wasn't reaching the end of my career. I was reaching the peak. The new assignment was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Global Crisis Coordination Director. A position created specifically for someone with her unique combination of experience, relationships, and proven ability to solve impossible problems. Torres reached over her shoulder and whistled softly. Ma'am, this is the most powerful strategic position in the military. Patricia smiled and walked to her retirement calendar. With a decisive motion, she tore it off the wall and dropped it in the trash. 30 years of preparation, she said. Time to see what I can really do. 6 months later, Colonel Patricia Hayes, now General Patricia Hayes, stood in the same war room where her legend had begun. But this time, she wasn't the old-timer being dismissed by young officers. She was the leader they all wanted to learn from. The room had changed too. The same bright young strategists were there, but their attitude toward experience had transformed completely. They asked different questions now. Better questions. General, said Torres, now serving as her deputy, we have a situation developing in the South China Sea. Patricia examined the reports with the same methodical approach that had solved the three-front crisis. But now, instead of working alone, she had a team that understood the value of experience working alongside innovation. What's our relationship map look like in that region? She asked Lieutenant Kim, who had become her specialist in alliance dynamics. Strong connections with Philippines, moderate with Vietnam, developing with Indonesia, Kim replied, using the framework Patricia had taught her. Major Park pulled up communication protocols. Should I start reaching out to established contacts? Patricia nodded approvingly. The foundation of every solution is trust built over time. Let's see what 30 years of relationships can accomplish. As her team sprang into action with the confidence that comes from having witnessed the impossible become routine, Patricia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3 months after her promotion, General Hayes received an unexpected visitor. Captain Torres knocked on her door, but this time his demeanor was completely different from that first crisis meeting. General, I wanted to thank you, he said, standing at attention with genuine respect rather than obligatory protocol. Patricia looked up from her strategic planning documents. For what, Captain? For changing how I see my own career, Torres replied. I used to think military service was a young person's game. Peak at 35, coast to retirement. You showed me that experience isn't just accumulated time, it's accumulated wisdom, relationships, and the ability to see patterns that others miss. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My father is 52, been passed over for promotion twice. I was going to suggest he retire early. Now I'm encouraging him to fight for those last few years. Who knows what he might accomplish?" Patricia smiled, understanding that the real victory wasn't just solving one crisis, it was changing minds about what's possible at any age. "Captain, every person you serve with is building something," she said. "Some build careers, some build knowledge. The smartest ones build relationships and trust. Your father has been building for 30 years. Don't let anyone convince him to stop before he discovers what all that building was for." Later that evening, Patricia stood in the Pentagon's observation deck, looking out over Washington, D.C. The city lights reminded her of all the crises, all the late-night phone calls, all the impossible problems that had seemed to define her career. But now she understood something that had taken 3 decades to learn. Every challenge had been preparation. Every relationship was an investment. Every failure was education for a future success she couldn't have imagined. The young officers saw her career as winding down because they measured success by energy and ambition. They didn't understand that true strategic power comes from having survived enough failures to recognize patterns, built enough relationships to have options, and accumulated enough wisdom to know which battles are worth fighting. At 49, Patricia wasn't slowing down. She was finally operating at full capacity, like a master chef who had spent decades learning ingredients, techniques, and timing. She was finally ready to create her masterpiece. What Patricia Hayes experienced isn't unique to the military. It's happening in corporate boardrooms, hospitals, law firms, and classrooms around the world every single day. The moment someone hits their late 42nd or early 52nd, a subtle shift occurs in how colleagues perceive their value. Dr. Susan Chen, a workplace psychology researcher at Stanford, has documented this phenomenon extensively. "We call it proximity bias," she explains. "People unconsciously assume that someone close to retirement is mentally preparing to disengage, even when there's no evidence to support that assumption." Patricia experienced this firsthand. The younger officers weren't being malicious, she reflected in a later interview. They genuinely believed that someone with 11 months left would naturally be less invested, less sharp, less capable of handling high-pressure situations. They couldn't imagine that proximity to retirement might actually sharpen your focus. This bias creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When leaders are excluded from critical decisions, given less challenging assignments, or bypassed for important projects, they often do begin to disengage. Not because of age, but because of treatment. The tragedy, Patricia notes, is that we're wasting our most experienced people right when they could be most valuable. A surgeon doesn't peak at 30. A lawyer doesn't become less effective at 50. But we act like military strategists somehow expire at retirement age. Research from the Harvard Business School reveals something counterintuitive. In complex problem-solving scenarios, teams led by experienced professionals, ages 45 to 60, outperform younger teams by an average of 23%. The reason isn't physical capability or energy levels, it's pattern recognition. Young minds are incredibly creative and energetic, explains Dr. Michael Torres, no relation to Captain Torres, a cognitive scientist who studies decision-making under pressure. But experienced minds have something equally valuable. They've seen similar patterns before. They can quickly identify what won't work because they've tried it. They know which relationships to activate because they've built them over decades. Patricia's phone calls during the crisis weren't just diplomatic outreach. They were the activation of a carefully constructed network built over 30 years of showing up, delivering results, and earning trust. No young officer, regardless of talent, could have made those calls with the same authority and immediate trust. Trust isn't transferred, Patricia explains. It's earned over time, crisis by crisis, promise kept by promise kept. You can't download that from a leadership manual or learn it in a weekend workshop. It takes decades to build the kind of relationships that can move mountains. This is why some of the world's most successful leaders don't hit their stride until their 52nd and 62nd. Warren Buffett's best investment years came after age 50. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's most impactful legal work happened in her 62nd and 72nd. Colonel Sanders was 62 when he franchised KFC. Patricia's story is part of a larger revolution happening across all industries. The traditional model of peak at 40, coast to 65, retire and disappear is crumbling as people live longer, healthier lives and realize their accumulated wisdom might be their most valuable asset. Retirement used to mean withdrawal from productive life, says Dr. Laura Carstensen, director of the Stanford Center on Longevity. But we're seeing a fundamental shift. People are redefining what it means to be experienced versus expired. 6 months after her promotion, General Hayes launched the Pentagon's first Experience Integration Initiative, a program designed to pair seasoned officers with younger colleagues in ways that maximize both innovation and wisdom. We were treating experience like a liability, she explains. Young officers would think, that old way of doing things. But experience isn't about old ways. It's about pattern recognition, relationship activation, and the confidence that comes from having survived impossible situations. The program has become a model for organizations worldwide. Instead of pushing experienced workers toward the exit, they're learning to leverage their accumulated wisdom as a strategic advantage. Lieutenant Kim, now a major herself, serves as the program's deputy director. Working with General Hayes taught me that experience isn't about being stuck in the past, she says. It's about having enough perspective to see the future more clearly. What happened in Patricia's brain during that crisis moment reveals something extraordinary about how expertise actually develops. Dr. Anders Ericsson, the world's leading researcher on expert performance, spent decades studying what separates true masters from merely competent professionals. The 10,000-hour rule is just the beginning, Dr. Ericsson explains. Real expertise requires what we call deliberate practice under pressure, and that only comes with decades of real-world challenges. When Patricia analyzed the three-front crisis, her brain wasn't just processing current information. Neuroscientist Dr. Amy Arnsten from Yale Medical School has documented how experienced professionals develop what she calls pattern libraries, neural networks that can instantly recognize complex situations based on previous experiences. A 5-year-old captain sees 3 separate problems. Dr. Arnsten notes, a 9-year-old colonel sees one familiar pattern with 3 variations. The experienced brain doesn't work harder, it works smarter. This is why Patricia could solve in hours what had stumped brilliant young minds for days. Her brain had cataloged similar crisis patterns from Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Each previous challenge had built neural pathways that allowed her to quickly identify not just problems, but solutions. Experience literally rewires your brain, explains Dr. Michael Merzenich, a neuroscientist who studies brain plasticity. Every challenge survived, every relationship built, every crisis managed creates new neural connections. By age 50, an experienced professional has a brain architecture that's fundamentally different from, and often superior to, a younger colleague's, in the plus. But here's the critical point. This neurological advantage only develops if you're continuously challenged. People who coast through their later career years don't develop these enhanced neural networks. Patricia's brain had become a strategic supercomputer precisely because she never stopped taking on impossible missions. Patricia's most powerful weapon wasn't her strategic mind, it was her relationship portfolio. Over 30 years, she had systematically invested in a global network that would become her crisis-solving arsenal. Most people think networking is about collecting business cards, says Keith Ferrazzi, author of Never Eat Alone and a relationship-building expert. But true relationship capital is built through what I call relationship deposits, moments when you help others succeed without expecting immediate returns. Patricia's phone calls during the crisis weren't random diplomatic outreach. Each call represented years of strategic relationship building. The Norwegian Prime Minister remembered how Patricia had personally coordinated medical evacuation for his injured soldiers during a 2009 NATO exercise. When his wife was diagnosed with cancer, Patricia had connected her with the best oncologists at Walter Reed Medical Center. The Kazakh energy minister's son had struggled academically at West Point until Patricia personally tutored him in strategic planning. When he graduated with honors, his father never forgot who had made that possible. The Japanese LNG specialist had lost her entire research facility in the 2011 tsunami. Patricia had mobilized Pentagon resources to help rebuild her laboratory, then spent 3 months working alongside her to restore critical energy infrastructure. Real relationship capital is built in moments of crisis, Patricia explains. When you show up for people during their worst times, not their best times, you create bonds that last decades. This is what management consultant Jim Collins calls relationship compound interest. Each genuine act of service builds trust. Trust creates loyalty. Loyalty generates influence. And influence, accumulated over decades, becomes the ability to move mountains with a phone call. Dr. Robert Cialdini, author of Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, has documented how reciprocity works across cultures. When someone helps you during a crisis, the psychological debt created can last for decades, he notes. Patricia wasn't calling in favors. She was activating a lifetime of genuine service to others. Patricia's transformation during the crisis represents what psychologists call the crisis leader phenomenon, a documented pattern where experienced professionals often perform at their absolute peak during high-pressure situations. Dr. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, author of Anti-Fragile, describes this as stress testing advantage. Young professionals break under extreme pressure because they haven't been stress tested, he explains. Experienced professionals thrive under pressure because they've survived so many previous stressors that their systems have become anti-fragile. This explains why Patricia appeared calmer as the crisis intensified. Her nervous system had been conditioned by decades of impossible situations. Where younger officers saw overwhelming complexity, she saw familiar patterns requiring proven solutions. Crisis management expert Dr. Stephen Fink has studied this phenomenon across industries. We consistently see that the most effective crisis leaders are between ages 45 and 65, he reports. They have enough experience to recognize patterns, enough relationships to mobilize resources, and enough confidence to make decisions quickly. But the most remarkable aspect of Patricia's performance was what Dr. Martin Seligman calls crystallized wisdom, the ability to apply accumulated knowledge with surgical precision. This type of wisdom only develops after decades of trial, error, success, and failure. Young minds are like powerful sports cars, Dr. Seligman explains. Experienced minds are like GPS systems with 30 years of traffic data. Both have value, but when you're lost in unknown territory, you want the GPS. Patricia's 3 phone calls weren't just diplomatic solutions. They were the crystallization of 3 decades of learning how the world actually works. She knew which relationships could be activated, which favors could be called in, and which solutions would work, because she had built that knowledge base through decades of real-world experience. 1 year after the crisis, Patricia's influence had extended far beyond solving a single international emergency. Her Experience Integration Initiative had fundamentally changed how the Pentagon approached age and expertise. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, now a major, had become a leading advocate for experience-based leadership. General Hayes taught me that wisdom isn't just about what you know, Kim reflects. It's about knowing who to call, when to call them, and how to frame requests so they want to help. Captain Torres had completely restructured his own career planning. Instead of viewing his later years as a gradual decline toward retirement, he began systematically building the kind of relationship portfolio that could make him a crisis leader in his own right. I realized I was planning for career decline instead of career peak, Torres admits. Now I'm investing in relationships, seeking challenging assignments, and building the kind of experience base that could make me valuable for decades to come. The initiative had also attracted attention from Fortune 500 companies seeking to better utilize their experienced workforce. General Patricia Hayes was invited to speak at leadership conferences across the globe, sharing the neuroscience and psychology behind experience-based decision-making. But perhaps the most significant impact was on younger military officers' career perspectives. Instead of viewing experience as a liability, they began seeing it as an asset worth building toward. The military used to have an up-or-out mentality, explains Dr. William Cohen, former Secretary of Defense. But Patricia's success demonstrated that up and experienced might be our most powerful combination. The story of Patricia Hayes proves something that every person over 40 needs to hear. Your best work might still be ahead of you. In a world obsessed with youth, energy, and the latest trends, we forget that some things only come with time. Relationships take decades to build. Trust takes years to earn. Wisdom comes from surviving failures that would break younger spirits. Patricia's story isn't just about military strategy or international relations. It's about the moment when you realize that everything you've learned, everyone you've met, and every challenge you've survived has been preparing you for something bigger. Think about your own career. How many relationships have you built? How many challenges have you survived? How many skills have you developed that younger colleagues don't even know they need yet? The neuroscience is clear. Your brain at 50 has capabilities that your brain at 25 simply couldn't possess. The relationship capital you've built over decades represents a strategic advantage that no amount of youthful energy can replicate. The pattern recognition you've developed through surviving multiple crises creates decision-making abilities that are literally irreplaceable. Every person dismissed as past their prime has the potential to be Patricia Hayes. Every career that looks like it's winding down might actually be gathering strength for its defining moment. The question isn't whether you're too old to achieve greatness. The question is whether you're ready to use everything you've learned to do something extraordinary. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or experience, share it in the comments below. Tell us about a time when your experience proved invaluable, or when someone dismissed your potential because of assumptions about age. Have you built relationships that could be activated in a crisis? Have you developed pattern recognition that younger colleagues lack? Are you approaching what could be your career peak, disguised as your career wind down? Because in the Hidden Heroes community, we know that legends aren't born, they're forged over decades of showing up, building relationships, and preparing for the moment when everything you've learned finally matters. Subscribe if you believe that experience is a superpower, and that sometimes the best performance of your career comes right before everyone expects you to take a bow. Remember, Patricia Hayes became a general at 49, solved an impossible crisis at 50, and launched her most impactful program at 51. Your peak performance might still be waiting for you. And if you're wondering whether your accumulated experience could be your secret weapon, consider this. Every expert Patricia called during that crisis was over 45. Every relationship that saved the day was built over decades, not months. Every solution that worked came from pattern recognition that only develops through surviving multiple failures and successes. The next time someone suggests you're winding down, remember General Hayes. Your decades of experience aren't preparing you for retirement. They're preparing you for your masterpiece. Don't let anyone convince you that your best days are behind you. In a world that worships youth, be the Patricia Hayes who proves that wisdom, relationships, and hard-earned expertise can solve problems that brilliant young minds cannot. Your moment to shine might be closer than you think. Patricia Hayes didn't just save 3 nations that week. She redefined what it means to reach your peak. At 49, when others saw decline, she demonstrated ascent. When others saw endings, she created beginnings. When others counted down to retirement, she counted up to her greatest achievement. Your career isn't a mountain you climb once and descend from. It's a series of peaks, and your highest summit might still be ahead of you, waiting for the right crisis to reveal your true capabilities.